Welcome to Raising Mommy, a podcast sanctuary where moms can come to listen, share, learn, and grow. I am your host, Kimberly Tyson, vegan blogger for EatPlantsForLife.com, wife and mom of two. Here in the studio today, I am joined in person by one of the three authors of the book, Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice. Dr. Marianne Celano is a family psychologist and professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Emory University School of Medicine. Thank you for joining me in the studio today.
Thank you for inviting me.
I do want to mention that she co-authored the book with two other doctors, Dr. Marietta Collins, who is a clinical psychologist and associate professor and director of behavioral medicine in the Department of Family Medicine at Morehouse School of Medicine, and retired clinical psychologist, Dr. Ann Hazard, who also co-authored the book and worked in the Department of Pediatrics at Emory University School of Medicine. They both couldn't join us today, but I'm very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
The book was beautifully illustrated by Jennifer, I want to say her last name correctly.
Zavoin.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully done.
Thank you.
The book, Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice, is a well-written and illustrated book for children that addresses race. It depicts the lives of two diverse families, one black, one white, and how they explain the meaning behind a recent shooting in their town of a black man by a police officer. Although written for children ages 4 to 8, it's not only a story, it's a reference guide for parents, offering a lot of tips, talking points, and sample dialogues for parents as they educate their children and begin the conversation of race and other diversities. I do want to point out that the book's authors are also diverse. One is black and two are white. So as it pertains to race, what is the difference between prejudice and discrimination?
So we like to draw a distinction between prejudice or bias and injustice. So prejudice or bias has to do with the way you think and the way perhaps values and thoughts, and injustice has to do with actions. So this book addresses both biases and injustice using a police shooting of an African-American man as a springboard for parents and children to talk about that.
How did the idea to write the book come about?
So the idea came about, I think, in the fall of 2016. There had been a number of police shootings of African-American men, women, and children, particularly Tamir Rice, who was only 12. And as psychologists, we became increasingly concerned about how kids react to these kinds of shootings. We're mindful that parents try to protect children, particularly young children, from hearing about scary things on the news. But we also believe that children think about these things and ask questions, and we wanted parents to be prepared. At the same time, we think there's a pattern of racial injustice that, another way of putting it is these shootings, the disproportionate shootings of African Americans in this country probably reflect a pattern of racial injustice. And we think there's a price to not talking about it with young children. So we understand that parents want to balance the need to keep their kids safe with the need to raise their children to be just and to counter racial injustice when they see it. And so we wrote the book to help parents talk about race and racial injustice with their children in a very direct way, using, again, this police shooting as just a springboard for the discussion.
How well did the authors know each other?
Oh, very well. Yeah, we're friends. We've known each other for, over 30 years. All of us worked at Grady for many years. Dr. Hazard's now retired. Dr. Collins now works at Morehouse. I'm still at Emory. But we've known each other well and feel very comfortable talking about issues of race with each other.
I think that for adults, it's hard to have the conversation about race just amongst ourselves. So when you talk about bringing it up with our children, it's even more challenging because you don't want to confuse them, but you do want to address their questions. When should the conversation start?
That's a really good question. And I think it really depends on the kid. I feel like we as parents know our children best. Some children may be ready to start the conversation as early as 4. Some children may not be ready until 6, 7, or 8. What we do know about young children and the way they learn about race and racial attitudes is that they benefit most from instruction. Ages 4, 5, and 6, and maybe up to 7. And really, after that, they benefit more from their own personal experiences. So the time for direct instruction when it comes to teaching kids about race is really the preschool years. So we feel like it's best to begin talking with them directly about these kinds of things at that time.
What are the benefits of starting earlier?
Well, if you don't talk about race, what are the costs? That's another way of thinking about it. So children notice race as early as 3, and they start developing their own racial attitudes. If parents are silent on this topic, then children will draw their own conclusions from what they see, and they're going to see disparities. They're going to see residential segregation. They're going to get ideas about race from the media. They're going to get ideas about race from their friends. And so if you're silent about it, we have to think about what are we conveying by that silence? Are we conveying shame, naivete, at worst collusion? But the kids will get their ideas about race elsewhere. However, if we talk about it with them, then we have the opportunity to share our own attitudes and our own values with kids and to directly contribute to their racial attitudes.
So you're saying that not talking about it will eventually have a negative outcome.
Right, because our society has structural oppression, and kids will pick up, that whiteness is privileged.
So how should the dialogue be brought about? Like, how should we start the conversation? Should we wait for them to start the conversation with their questions, or should we look for opportunities to bring it up?
Well, in my experience, I think both. I think most kids will bring it up in some kind of way. However, there may also be opportunities, something that's seen on TV, an older child's comment, an older sibling's comment in the family. There will be opportunities. It sort of depends on how much diversity there is and where you live and in the kinds of images that the child is exposed to and stories and so forth. But I think kids will bring it up, and parents should be ready. And one of the things we felt really committed to was having some kind of guide for parents with our book. And since our book is published by Imagination Press, which is an imprint of the American Psychological Association, all of their books have guides at the end of the book that help educate readers about the problem that's addressed. And they gave us special permission to extend that section of the book. So we have several pages of child-friendly vocabulary words, conversation guides, and even sample dialogues for parents who are addressing these questions with their children.
Yes, I did enjoy that part of the book. It was very helpful to see sample dialogues, especially. What are some of the do's and don'ts that you could give, tips you could give parents when talking about it with their children?
I think the most important do listen to your child, right? If your child has a question, listen to it. If you don't know the answer right away, that's fine. But then say, that's a really important question. I want to think about the answer, and we'll talk about it again later, and then bring it up again. I like to comment on how often kids ask us questions when we're driving in traffic. Kids will often ask questions from the back seat of the car. Sometimes it's easier. And that's not always the best time for us to give a very thoughtful answer. So do listen and do bring it up later. I think the don't shush your child or say we don't talk about that, because that also conveys a message. I think you can say, we're going to talk about that later, but not, no, we don't talk about that, because then that may discourage the child from bringing up other questions. And we want to be part of our children's social worlds, and this is an important part of that.
My children, they're in middle school now. I find that the opportunity to bring it up is more frequent than when they were smaller. They're more exposed to news headlines. Their friends are talking about it. They have questions about racial divides. They bring it up in school in their curriculum. They talk about segregation and slavery and Martin Luther King. My challenge as a Black mom are the encounters that they're faced with. They have issues with friends. They're actually the minority in their school. They're the 5%. So when my daughter comes home and she talks about when she was in elementary school, it wasn't as big of a deal because it was easier to talk to her about the kid that's curious in preschool and say things like, "Why is your skin darker?" It was much easier for me to address those questions.
Right.
But as they got older and the kids are, I don't want to say middle school kids are meaner, but they can be more hurtful and intentional in their words. I find it a challenge to talk to her when a child says something like, "Well, why is your hair braided? And why isn't your hair straight?" Or,
Can I touch your hair?
exactly. She has a friend that's from Jamaica, and her friend says things like, "Well, why do you talk white? Why do you talk that way?" So she has those challenges. So I find it gets harder for me to address those type of questions. Any advice for me?
Wow. How much time do we have?
Plenty.
Those are really great questions. And I agree, it gets much more complicated when children are older and contexts change, right?
Right.
I mean, it just raises all sorts of issues. How is it different when you're the minority in your school, whether you're white or Black, versus when you're in the majority? And I've heard lots of kids sort of talk about the problems with not being Black enough, not being,
Right.
that kinds of things. So there's lots of different issues that come up. I think the most important thing to say to parents is that you want the discussion to be open. You want your child to know they can always come to you
Be
and talk.
comfortable.
Yeah, even if you don't have the right answers. Sometimes parents will talk about their own experiences. And that's helpful to children. You have to be mindful, though, of when your discussion of your own experiences becomes a burden to your child. So there's that balance to strike. But I think it's really helpful to listen and then to ask the child, particularly if it's a child in middle school. You're not doing direct instruction anymore. You're saying, well,
Right.
what do you think you should do? Well, what would happen? What are your thoughts about what you should do? And what would happen if you did that? And what would happen if you didn't do that? And, if you're talking about a child sticking up for herself and not letting someone touch her hair or, try to assert herself around certain questions that are experienced as too intrusive or perhaps racist. So what are some ways you might address that? What are some ways you might address that if the questions are being directed to someone else and you're a witness? Because really a lot of times the questions, the kind of prejudicial statements that come up are directed to another person, and our children are witnesses to that. And so I think we should spend a little bit more time talking to kids about not so much what do you do if it happens to you, but what do you do if it's happening to someone in the room that you're in,
Right.
And how can you stand up for somebody? And how can you speak up for somebody? And that's one of the messages in the book. The characters, we were really intent on wanting to have not only messages for parents, but a message for children that you can counter racial injustice in your life with your friends. And it's important to stick up for friends that are treated unfairly. And many kids really resonate with that message. And the other message we wanted to communicate to kids is the benefit of inclusion and diversity. As one character in the book says, you never know who's going to be your best friend. Right? To be open to diversity in all forms. So we think those messages are really important, and those messages are equally important to middle schoolers.
So I think in some cases, when a child is faced with being stereotyped or a racial bias, that a quick response could be to retaliate and mirror the behavior. What do you say to your child if you witness that or you see some negative racial comments made?
So when you say retaliate, do you mean without acknowledging what's happened? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, retaliate against the child that is saying these things to them, and they mirror that behavior and say things that are also prejudice.
Yeah, I think it's much more powerful to label what's occurred. You know, the sort of ouch, oops paradigm for dealing with racial microaggressions. So if you're the victim of a microaggression, I think the best thing to say is ouch, you know, in some way. So you're saying, wow, you just did this. This hurt. And that gives the other person the opportunity to say, oops, you know, and to talk about not only what their intention was, because the intention isn't as important as what actually happened. But it gives the person who was the aggressor an opportunity to say, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I see that my actions had that effect, and I want to fix it. So I think it's important for people to say what happened and then to say they won't put up with it and to stand up for people who are having that happen to them.
So if you hear your child make a racial joke, how should a parent handle that?
Well, that's actually one of the examples, I think, in the back of the book. And so we have an example, and the parent, upon overhearing the joke, would say to the child, would probably pull the child aside to talk to the child and say, you know, I know that when you said that joke, you thought it was funny, but that part of the joke, you know, specifically mentioned the part of the joke that was hurtful to other people. And the parent should point out how that joke could hurt other people's feelings. Because we're also, as parents, building empathy in our kids. So if a parent were to point out that that could hurt other people's feelings, most children would say, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I said it because it was funny. And the parent would say, well, no, that's not a good joke because it hurts people's feelings. Maybe you can tell a different kind of joke, or maybe you can do something else.
In what ways can parents demonstrate positive behavior as it pertains to differences, whether it's race or other differences, because there are many differences?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to be really inclusive as parents in terms of the stories that we introduce to our children through TV, books, you know, movies, art, images, and everything. So that's one part of it. But I think a more important part is to think about the diversity in our own relationships. I think some research has shown that children's racial attitudes are influenced more by their perceptions of who their parents' friends are than anything else. And so it's important to have relationships, friends, relationships with people who are diverse in lots of different ways, and to encourage children to also have those relationships with lots of different kinds of people. And I don't just mean people of different races and cultural traditions, but also people with disabilities and people who, you know, lots of diversity in all its forms.
So it's not just about race, it's other differences like geographic, religion.
People with autism, lots of different things.
Okay, absolutely. So as a mom as a Black mom, how can I encourage positive racial identity with my daughters?
So there's a lot of research actually on that, and APA has some literature on this. There's a whole term, ethnic socialization, and ethnic minority parents actually do this much more than white people do, and there's sort of different aspects of it. One aspect is to instill pride in cultural traditions, civil rights heroes, you know, for some people, other kinds of historical lessons, perhaps going back to Africa or Jamaica or whatever. Also, though, a positive racial identity includes some preparation for bias because children will be victims of bias, unfortunately, and so parents have to prepare them for that and teach them how to counter that. And also, the other part of it is teaching children to value people not based on identity group, but on how they act. We like our friends for their kindness. Doesn't matter how they're born. You know, we like people based on how they treat us, how kind they are. And so treating people equally is also part of that positive racial identity.
Would you like to read the book to us? I would love to hear it.
I would love to.
Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice. We're going to enjoy the book.
Thank you. It's hard to read a book without talking about the illustrations.
They're beautiful.
The cover of the book features two children, one white, one black, sort of standing back to back against the backdrop of what appears to be a newspaper. And their footprints kind of leading off in different directions. Okay, so it starts like this. Something bad happened in our town. The news was on the TV, the radio, and the internet. The grown-ups didn't think the kids knew about it, but the kids in Miss Garcia's class heard some older kids talking about it, and they had questions. After school, Emma asked her mother, "Why did the police shoot that man?" "It was a mistake," said her mother. "I feel sad for the man and his family." "Yes, the police thought he had a gun," said her father. "It wasn't a mistake," said her sister Liz. "The cop shot him because he was black." I should note that this is a white family discussing this. Emma was confused. "He's brown, not black," she said. "Some black people have dark brown skin and some have light brown skin," Emma's father explained. "Black usually means African American. Most of their ancestors were brought here from Africa as slaves." "I know what a slave is," said Emma. "That's when you have to do whatever the other person says." Yes, slaves had to do whatever white people told them to do. Even after slavery ended, white people didn't let black people live where they wanted, go to school with white people, or vote. Who are white people? White people came here from places in Europe or Russia or other countries. We are white, even though our skin is light tan. "Did our family do those bad things a long time ago?" asked Emma. "Yes," answered her mother. "Back then, many white people thought that they were better than black people, even though it wasn't true." Liz added, "Some white people still think most black men and boys are dangerous, even though they're not." "Was the man that got shot dangerous?" asked Emma. "No," her mother said. "Shooting him was a mistake. It was a mistake that is part of a pattern." "Like the pattern in my blanket?" Emma asked. "Yes, but this pattern is being nice to white people and mean to black people. It is an unfair pattern." "Suppose you had a birthday party and invited everyone in your class except the black kids," her mother said. "How would the black kids feel?" "They would be sad," Emma said, "or mad. And you would be missing out because you never know who's going to be your best friend," said Liz. "And you could help others to be fair," said her mother. "Like telling Anna to stop teasing Ling about her name?" asked Emma. Her mother gave her a hug. "Yes, just like that." And then in the next set of pictures, there's a black family. In another house, Josh asked his mother, "Can police go to jail?" "Yes," said his mother. "Why do you ask?" "That white policeman who shot the black man," said Josh. "Will he go to jail?" "What he did was wrong," said his mother. "But he won't go to jail," said his father. "Why not?" asked Josh. "Cops stick up for each other," said Josh's brother Malcolm, "and they don't like black men." Josh was confused. "Why not? Some police are black." "You're right," said his mother. "Uncle James is a police officer, and so is my friend Kenya." "There are many cops, black and white, who make good choices," said his father, "but we can't always count on them to do what's right." Malcolm added, "I could get stopped by the police just because I'm black, even if I don't do anything wrong." "That's not fair," Josh said. "What if it was a white man in the car? Would the police have shot him?" "They probably wouldn't have even stopped the car," said his father. "Sometimes white people are treated better than black people," said his mother, "but it's not right. Everybody should be treated fairly." Josh's mother gave him a hug. "We're proud of who we are. Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr., and Nelson Mandela were strong and brave black leaders. They showed us that we can stand up for our rights and set good examples for others. They were treated unfairly, but helped others learn to be more fair." "Some people haven't learned yet," said his father angrily. "Why are you mad?" asked Josh. "I'm mad that we're still treated poorly sometimes, but I can use my anger to make things better," said his father. "Black people have a lot of power if we work together to make changes." "I have power," Josh said, "and I'm smart." His father smiled. "You're right." His mother added, "And you can change people's hearts by sticking up for someone who is not treated fairly." Like how Malcolm sticks up for me when the kids tease me about my glasses? Josh asked. He tells them to step off. Just like that, his parents said. The next day, a new kid joined Emma and Josh's class. His name was Omad, and he was from a country far away. Omad didn't know where to sit or what to do because it was his first day in school. He talked a little bit, but it was hard to understand him. He said he was learning English. After lunch, the class went outside to play soccer. Daniel and Sophia picked kids to be on their teams. All of the kids were picked to be on a team except Omad. Daniel said Omad probably didn't know how to play because he was new. Sophia said Omad might not be good at soccer. Josh remembered what his mother said about sticking up for people who were treated unfairly. Emma remembered what her mother said about unfair patterns and birthday parties. All of a sudden, Omad wasn't alone. Emma and Josh were leading him to their team. "We have enough kids on our team," Daniel said. "We don't need him." But Josh was ready. "Step off," he said. "He's playing." "Yeah," said Emma. "We don't want to miss out." And just like that, Emma and Josh gained a new friend and started a better pattern in their school. And that's the end.
Thank you for reading that. I want to note that the guide in the back, it's called A Note to Parents and Caregivers. Do you suggest parents read the book first and then read the guide before reading to their children?
Actually, I do. I think it's really important to look at the guide for parents and teachers, to look at the guide before reading the book. And on the publisher's website, there's a free guide for educators. It's a read-aloud guide that has sample questions and ways to introduce the book. And in addition to the guide that's in the book, on the publisher website, there's a list of additional resources for parents and teachers, as well as a number of books, children's books that we've looked at, and we've already updated that since the book came out.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I see some of the guide, you have general guidelines, you have countering racism and racial injustice with children, how to address racial bias with children, unique issues for African American families. Let's see, sample parent-child questions and answers. You even have vocabulary words and child-friendly definitions, and then the sample dialogues of special relevance for African American families. And I see your resources in the back. So lots of great information here.
Thank you.
Something Happened in Our Town is a great way to spark the conversation about race. How can our audience get a copy of the book?
It's available from the publisher, American Psychological Association, from independent bookstores, and from Amazon, also Barnes & Noble. So lots of different booksellers have it available.
Well, thank you, Dr. Celano, for coming into the studio today. I know you had a lot of traffic to deal with, so I appreciate you coming.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be able to talk about this with you.
And I enjoy you sharing your insight on the subject and offering parents a guide on starting the conversation of race and other diversities. Be sure to find Raising Mommy anywhere you listen to podcasts. Check out new episodes every Saturday. Follow us on Twitter at RaisingMommyGA. Search for me on Facebook and Instagram at eatplantsforlife.com or Raising Mommy Podcast. Don't forget to email me at raisingmommy@appenmediagroup.com to share the random, fun, and sweet things that your kids say, text, or do for our Off the Cuff Kids segment. If your comment is chosen for a future show, you will win a gift card. Remember, first names only, and please include the age or grade of your child. If you have a screenshot of the text or note or photo of the deed, please also include it in your submission. Thanks for listening.